I'm Julie Bulitt. I've been a family therapist for over 30 years.
I'm David Bulitt. I've been a divorce and family lawyer for more than 35 years.
Together, we have been married for more than 37 years.
In our professional practices, the two of us have been witnesses to individuals and families struggling with life's most difficult challenges. In this podcast, we will talk about the conversations we have had,
The conversations we should have had.
and those that every relationship needs to have in order to find success, happiness, and fulfillment.
This is Conversations for Couples.
The podcast. Well, folks, welcome to Conversations for Couples.
The podcast.
That's something that we do all the time.
We've practiced that for years.
Yeah, yes, we have. And today we have two folks that do some of what I do, but also some of what Julie does. And we're going to focus more on what Julie does. And what these two people are, they're relationship consultants. They're boundary experts. They're authors of the book Boundary Badass, which I love, a powerful method for elevating your value and relationships. They own and operate an entity called the Divorce Family Mediation and Counseling, and that's in Dallas, Texas. And Jan and Jillian Yuhas are sisters in business together. So,
I love that.
So before we get into the business itself, how's it working out with the two sisters working together?
Of course we have our sisterly moments, but we manage that, we can set aside our differences and still manage what needs to be done for work. So
tell us a little bit, sort of to give us a jump off point, a little bit about your backgrounds and how you got into, the mental health field and how you got into doing what you're doing now.
Yeah, so we started many moons ago, about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Volunteering at a crisis hotline. And we used to mediate between teenagers and their parents that had ran away from home and we used to resolve conflict, set boundaries, figure out what led the child to running away from home, and come up with agreements that would allow the child to feel safe to return home. And that volunteer experience led us to getting our master's in marriage and family therapy. And later on, we got certified in micro expressions, lie detection, and are certified mediators and also coaches.
Wow. That's a lot. I'm just thinking about the marriage family therapy training in itself. That's a lot, but you added a lot of layers to that. I want to dive in about the lie detection. I'm intrigued with that, but maybe we have other things
I'm
to
not
talk
sure.
about.
No, go ahead. No, you always jump in and interrupt my plan anyway, so it's fine. It's absolutely fine. Go ahead.
So I have two questions. The first question was, so you both agreed, did you set out to say let's do this together, or did it just sound like a good idea to one of you and one of you led the other there?
We've always been in business together and sort of had similar goals and values in life, I would say. And so across all three of our businesses that we run in terms of relationship-based companies, we've always just sort of enjoyed working with each other. You have that trusted bond, and we have this we mindset, which is sort of implements and part of our work that we do. And so for us, it's always just been natural to work with each other.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So you got the training, the family marriage therapy training first. Is that correct? Okay.
Correct.
And then tell me about the lie detection certification. I've never heard of that, and I want to know about that. And I certainly hope that you don't.
Hoping to try to catch me in one?
I don't know. I mean, how do you use that in your work?
It's actually called deception detection, but it's all about asking people's questions and then paying attention to their micro expressions or their body language. Because often if people are telling a lie, their behaviors are going to sort of present the opposite of what they're saying.
Mm-hmm. So incongruent behavior,
Correct.
nonverbal behavior.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And then how do you use that in the work that you do?
So we use it more, I would say, in our divorce and mediation company when it comes to lie detection, but I'm not usually using it when it comes to reading someone's body language, although sometimes clients do send us videos and recordings or things that are happening. But more or less we'll use it we do a lot of psychological analysis of documentation in terms of the communications between co-parents. And once you understand when you're dealing with specific types of personalities that are coercively controlling, and you know their personality type, you can start to read through the lines of their communication, and you know their patterns of their behavior, and you know when they're telling the truth and when they're not.
You
So
just mentioned a term that I read, and I did read a portion of your book. You mentioned a term, coercive control. You might know what that is. I don't know what that is. So I'm curious to know what it is and how it impacts the work that you do with families, with couples.
So I would say it does happen in some marriages, which is what usually leads
and
to
in the
the
workplace too.
Yeah, what leads to the divorce. Usually, when you have coercive control, it's a very power imbalanced dynamic between the couple, and most of it's focused on psychological, emotional, and financial abuse in the relationship. So it's very covert in terms of the style of abuse that is occurring. There's usually not physical evidence of it. There's usually not any other sort of, you couldn't see it from the outside perspective. So you have to be able to understand that person's motive and what they're trying to do and how they are weaponizing specific situations or triggering their partner into coercing them into being submissive to whatever their goal is or narrative is.
And often they have a hard time speaking for themselves. So they will always triangulate other people into the conversation to basically say, this person agrees with me, or this person didn't, state XYZ. So why are you even saying that? So they'll always bring other people into the conversation because they have a very hard time communicating just for themselves. Because
How does that differ from gaslighting?
Gaslighting is part of it, but when it comes to coercive control, it's much more malicious. It's much more the patterns are throughout the whole entire.
You have to connect. It's not so blatantly obvious. You have to connect the dots over a period of time, because this person's going to present very kind and very nice. Like if you were to meet them in person, they're not going to be necessarily over out there. You're going to think that this person would never say anything or do anything, because the way they do it is always behind the scenes, where they can basically target their victim. And they usually it's often one person that they're, emotionally, physically involved with. And so often that person becomes their target, and they will do everything to weaponize and to make sure they maintain that power, because they feel actually powerless a lot of times in that connection.
Yeah.
So let me toggle for just a second to, and I hate to say typical, because we all know in my work and yours, it's hard to find someone typical or the normal, the usual, that sort of thing. But let's talk to us a little bit about a couple that comes into your office. They're having struggles, whatever they may be. What does it look like in terms of your treatment, in terms of your work with that couple? Again, this is a couple that's together, that wants to stay together, but is struggling for whatever reason. Maybe it's kids, maybe it's finance, maybe it's intimacy, maybe it's some combination thereof. What do you do with those folks out of the blocks, and how do you lay sort of a plan or path for them?
Well, the first goal is to figure out what each of their goals are that they would hope to achieve in the coaching sessions. And so I would also have a conversation with each one of them independently, and then also have some sessions where we're collaborative working on things too. But often, a lot of times with couples, they're very fearful to usually share certain aspects of the relationship in front of their partner. So sometimes we'll do some independent work as well as couple sessions. But in those moments, it's really identifying what are their goals, what do they hope to achieve, and then figuring out what action steps we're going to create in order to overcome the certain problems to achieve those goals.
And do you find that people, like will tell you stuff individually and then sort of clam up when you have the session with the other partner? Is that an issue?
It really depends on the couple itself. I do have some couples who are very outspoken and have no problem sharing in front of their partner. I think if there is sometimes some, coercion going on or abuse, emotional manipulation, that could be much harder to share outright in the initial session or two. But often most of our couples, I will say, once we've built that relationship with them, they feel more comfortable because they start to learn the skills in terms of how to address these problems very assertively.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's where I think our approach is a little bit different than the typical therapeutic sort of approach, where therapy is more feeling oriented,
Mm-hmm.
and we help our clients communicate from a place of value. Because when you're dealing with power imbalances or struggles in relationships, it really boils down to being able to know your value system and communicating your needs from your values. For example, if we value communication, but the trigger might be you feel ignored by your partner on a regular basis. So the opposite of our emotional trigger is the value that we need to seek to be met in the relationship. And then we negotiate how we're going to come to an agreement where each partner, because they could have two different communication styles, and we negotiate how a boundary of what works for the relationship. If you have a husband who's like, I don't want to talk to you all day at work, I'm working, that's my time away from home, that's time away from our relationship, I'll see you when I get home. But if you have a wife, maybe she's like, oh, it'd be nice to like chit chat every once in a while, maybe she sends a text here or wants to have a 5-minute conversation over lunch, whatever. They might have very different communication styles, and so we need to figure out that happy medium of their two different perspectives and bridge the gap so they can create greater connection and alignment.
Mm-hmm. And you do a lot of work with boundaries. So
Correct.
so I'm assuming that that's, boundaries, healthy boundaries within a marriage, and then if the marriage dissolves, creating boundaries after the marriage. So what kind of, give us some examples of, like boundaries that you help people create.
So we break it down into personal boundaries and relationship boundaries. So personal boundaries for ourselves are sort of like maintaining like self-care and self-love on a day-to-day basis. So what are we doing for ourselves each and every day to fill up our own cup and to keep our personal alignment to our inner truth and our values? Because it's going to be very challenging to set boundaries with others and have those open conversations if we don't feel already aligned to our value system. And we can't ask for something if we're not practicing it and holding to it on a day-to-day basis. So I think having personal boundaries, like I said, getting up, going to the gym, creating healthy meals, those are things for ourselves that we want to maintain. When it comes to our relationships, this is where we make requests in the relationship based on our needs and values. And so if I want to have date night once a week with my partner, I'm going to basically say, how about, if it's not happening, then I would say, I would like to be able to set a boundary around that. How about every Saturday night we go on a date night? So that might be a boundary a couple would set. Or maybe they have a family meeting once a month where they want to talk about certain things on the table, whether they want to talk about their finances, the kids, parenting, whatever that may be. So each relationship is going to be different based on their dynamics, but they're creating boundaries that are going to help support and evolve that connection and create deeper, because we don't want to create disconnects when we're setting boundaries. The whole goal is how do we align and live with each other to evolve?
Yeah.
People who do relationship work, and you do, and the two of us do as well, people talk a lot about compromise. And what I noticed in some of your work is that you focus on, and I think, Jillian, you just mentioned this, negotiation rather than compromise. What's the difference, and why is negotiation important?
Well, we're negotiating like the terms of the agreement, the boundary. So we're taking two opposing perspectives, which is what's causing the gap in the relationship, and we're bridging that gap by coming together. And we might have to compromise in that situation, because if you have, for example, the communication value, you have someone who does not want to talk all day, they might have to compromise and say, okay, I'll talk to you at lunch. And the other person's like, okay, fine, I'm not going to talk to you all day, but we can talk at lunch. So that they are compromising, but neither one, and we don't negotiate our value as a person, but we're negotiating around that shared value within the relationship. And normally we recommend, and you can determine the longevity of a relationship if they have at least 3 out of their 5 relationship values in alignment, then the relationship is more likely to go the distance.
So what do you do if someone doesn't value themselves, which, as a therapist, I'm sure you see all the time, where somebody really doesn't think they're worthy, they're good enough, and that triggers all kinds of, situations in relationships. What do you do with that?
Yeah, so a lot of times we have to get into childhood wounds, because that's usually even where our triggers are coming from. Childhood are playing out in our romantic relationships.
Yes.
And so, yes, if someone they don't feel worthy of love, and so they could be engaging subconsciously in these self-sabotaging habits in their relationship and pushing their partner away, even though they want their partner to be closer, because maybe they have a fearful avoidant attachment style. So we'd also get into attachment styles as well, because those behaviors, our emotional triggers, childhood wounds, our attachment styles all play out in terms of the dynamics that are happening within that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you guys, because we've talked a lot about the silent treatment, because I think that silent treatment as a therapist and as a partner to my husband who hates the silent treatment, how do you guys deal with that communication style? Because we see that all the time.
So, in a way, it's destructive patterns of behavior. So for the person who's being silent, how come they're not saying, like, I need to call a timeout, or I need 20 minutes to myself? How come they're not speaking up in a way that's respectful to the relationship? Because in that moment, when they're doing the silent treatment, they're actually operating from their ego, from the mean mindset, and they're very self-consumed and self-centered and self-focused on whatever works for them. They're not honoring that relationship. So in that moment,
and they also could be emotionally triggered and shut down, especially if they have more of an avoidant attachment style, and so they go into silence as a self-protection mechanism.
Right.
And so in that moment, so we would want to ask that person, how about, have you tried expressing to your partner, I need time to digest or think about what we're talking about. Can we get back to this, tomorrow or later this evening, whatever that is? Because by them not communicating is disrespectful, not only to themselves, but also to the relationship. And so also then the person who's on the receiving end of the silent treatment, I would ask them, have you advocated in terms of a set of boundary around communication? Like, I feel dismissed when we're not able to talk about topic X. I value communication. How can we talk about this in an amicable way that respects both of our needs?
Yeah, we developed this thing ourselves, which neither one of us really. Well, every once in a while there was some silence earlier in our marriage, but as we grew, and we've been together, married for 38 years now, we sort of, that's not an issue. But we started this sort of thing we call safe talk, I don't know, a couple of years back, which is, when you're getting ready to talk about something either that happened, right, that you felt was hurtful, or something that bothered you, or something you want to talk about that is going to be difficult conversation,
triggering
to your partner. One of us says safe talk. Now, Julie's usually the one who institutes safe talk, which generally my response is by going, oh, here we go, one of those kind of things. But it does seem to help, and that's certainly infinitely better than not talking to your partner, whether it's for an hour. Or some cases we've seen people who haven't talked for weeks. They just continue,
years, and then they end up in his office getting a divorce.
Generally so, and spending a lot more money than they ought to. But it's just not a healthy thing. I do want to ask you about something else though. So getting back to this compromise / negotiation piece that you're trying to work with this couple that's with you, what we have found is that oftentimes when folks are working toward, or negotiating, or working towards some sort of a compromise, oftentimes one of the two thinks that wasn't a compromise at all. I just did whatever my partner wanted me to do. So that's the compromise. And then there's resentment that sort of reeks from there, that leaks from there. So, how when in working with a couple that are very feel differently about a particular issue, whatever it may be, whether, like I said, let's say it's intimacy. All right. And you have one partner who feels strongly that we're not having enough intimacy. The other partner says, no, I don't want to have any more. And so, and you have a lot of other emotions, rotating around that particular issue. So how do you manage that without one of the two partners feeling, that they didn't just compromise, they gave
up.
in?
Yeah, they gave in.
Well, I think this is where they have to talk through, what are they both willing to commit to in order to show respect for their relationship? Because for this relationship to continue to evolve and thrive, they have to come to some kind of resolution, or otherwise we're going to be in an impasse, and then neither partner's needs are going to be met. And so perhaps it's a trial and error process. If one says, we haven't had, been involved with each other for 2 weeks, and another one's like, well, I need to have it 2 or 3 times a week. So then we have to say, okay, let's try once a week to begin and see how that goes, and then get comfortable in that process. And then if they say, okay, this isn't working or this is too much, then they might have to alter their behaviors until they figure out what's going to work that provides fulfillment for both partners in that relationship. But in that process too, you might have to explore what's holding back one partner from wanting to engage in intimacy. Are they not feeling safe in the relationship? Are they feeling like their needs aren't being met in other areas? So now they're withholding intimacy.
Or maybe they're just tired. Maybe they're just tired because
there's a lot of factors. So we have to explore what are the other factors that are playing out in the dynamic that's causing this intimacy issue.
Which this is where like discovery questions come in very handy, which are open-ended questions to gain farther insight into that relationship dynamic and patterns.
What would you say are sort of like your top 3, issues that couples come to your office with?
I would say other family members meddling within the relationship, misaligned attachment styles, or not being able how to work with their attachment styles. So one person is constantly feeling rejected by the other person when really they have these attachment styles that neither person is, because a lot of us don't really know what our attachment styles are until you do some self-discovery work later on in life. What else?
Most people don't even know what an attachment style is. So you have to, I take there's a little educating that goes on, but yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
And then I also would think probably trauma responses where people tend to either go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode, which tends to shows they're reactive versus learning to respond in a very confident manner, even when conflict does arise.
So I think a lot of our clients, not only are we working on the relationship dynamics, we're also working on strengthening their inner voice and defining their authentic truth. So that
that's what I wanted to ask you
effectively.
Yeah. That's exactly where I was going, because you talk about someone helping folks honor their authentic voice. So what is that?
Explain that to a divorce lawyer.
I'm going to play stupid, but I think I get a general sense. But I think it's important to talk about because it's an interesting way of putting it. So tell our folks out there, what does that mean? An authentic voice, and when you talk about honoring it, what does that mean in terms of your work with folks?
So when it comes to speaking from your authentic voice, it's about honoring your inner alignment and truth according to your values, but it's also about speaking up in a way where you're not fearful and you're choosing to communicate because you love yourself. So many people are fearful to communicate and speak up, and so they tend to,
because they fear the other person's reaction or the loss of the relationship or connection if they were to speak up.
And so then that means you're not honoring your truth if you stay silent or you just appease the other person. So when it comes to like owning your truth and communicating, it's all about feeling confident in your own skin and knowing that your voice is your most powerful asset and tool to helping yourself either move forward in this relationship or be able to make better decisions. Because by staying silent, then you don't learn who you are. You also don't know how this other person's going to respond either. So you can create these whole scenarios and never speak your truth. And then the relationship might just die because you never spoke up. But a lot of
it's back to that resentment thing that we were talking about. I didn't say what I meant, and now I'm mad at myself for that, right? And that sort of builds upon that.
Yeah, and we've noticed with a lot of couples that we've done coaching with is that people will stay silent until they explode.
Yeah.
And that's a really big problem in a lot of relationships, that people are conflict avoidant, where they don't talk about things and then they just they can't deal with it anymore.
We called it in our first book, we called it cussing to kissing. Where we're on day one, we're screaming and yelling. They're screaming and yelling at each other. They won't talk to each other. They hate each other. And on day two, they're at dinner in a restaurant and they can't keep their hands off of each other. Then they're back on day three, and it's a bit of an exaggeration, but we did see a lot of that, and we have seen a lot of that in relationships with folks that we have worked with. When people come to you, do they work with the two of you together, or do each of you have a certain focus of what you do within your practice?
We work with couples separately. And and we focus on all the same things. We don't,
Okay.
neither one of us has a specialty.
And do you guys do consultations with each other? Do you collaborate on your cases? Like, oh my God, let me tell you about this, or let me get your input on this.
Oh yes,
Yes.
we definitely talk to each other and
Get other perspective, or like, what do you think? Do you agree with this? Or,
Mhm.
or what would you do differently? I think it's always good because sometimes we can have our own psychological blind spots where we may not see something.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I think having those conversations is really helpful because it also strengthens our coaching abilities and skills too.
It's so cool. So what does your family think about you guys working together?
I think they're always used to us being like together, so it's just very natural. Because we've always had the same kind of goals and path.
Pathway, yeah. They're very supportive. Yeah.
Do you have any other siblings?
Yes, we do. Younger siblings.
Yeah.
Do they feel left out?
No.
You said that together.
Yeah, you did. And that probably happens a lot where you guys are talking and saying the same
Yes,
thing.
we do.
Now,
Yeah,
you guys
I
are
love
in
that.
Dallas. Do you see folks remotely or only in person in the office?
All of our clients are remote.
They
Yeah.
are.
Okay.
So-
So, and can you see people outside of Texas?
Oh, yeah. We see
Like,
people
globally.
globally around the world. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So you're doing coaching versus therapy at that point.
Yes.
That's great. And if somebody wants to work with you, what is the best way to get in touch with you guys?
They can head over to janandjillian.com if they are looking to improve their relationships.
Awesome. And we're going to include the link to your book, your Instagram handle, if that's what they still call it, and all the other links in our show notes. Jan and Jillian, thank you so much for coming aboard all the way from Dallas, Texas. It's really, really great to meet you. And we wish you all the best in a very difficult field, particularly these days.
Yeah. We are the Bullits, www.t. Yeah, W.
Forgot a W.
The THEBULITTS. And you can find us on all social media pages at the Bullits.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you
And
very
this
much.
is Conversations for Couples.
The podcast.
There you go.
Julie Bulitt is a professionally licensed clinical social worker and family therapist. David Bulitt is a divorce and family lawyer. Julie is not your therapist, and David is not your lawyer. This podcast is meant for educational and entertainment purposes only.